Hi everyone, welcome to episode 13 of Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time to join us. And today I'm with Phil as usual, and this episode is all about the inbound evolution from lead generation to demand generation. And it's quite a hot topic at the moment right now, but I'd say there's relatively limited information on it. So yeah, I know we're both really excited about hopefully giving some real valuable insights to you. And I know I, for one, have been through the lead gen to demand gen process before in my time before Blend. I know that Phil's been through it for Blend ourselves a few years back and for a number of clients. So hopefully not only will we be able to give you some actual real insight into, making the shift, the kind of things that go on, but also a couple of different perspectives on actually how that pans out.
That's right, Dan. Yeah, it's been really interesting, comparing and contrasting experiences, with you and with those that we've had at Blend for ourselves and for our clients. And then also using that sort of, differing set of perspectives to extend it out into the new realm that really is demand creation, on platforms and in formats such as this. So, that's been a really interesting part of the journey more recently too.
Yeah, love it. So, right, we'll dive in. If you're watching live, feel free to ask questions on LinkedIn. If you drop them in the comments section of this LinkedIn Live, then we'll answer them as we go along. So, put them in and we'll pick them up.
Yeah.
Right, so we're kicking things off, I suppose, with why we're actually talking about this today. Why are businesses thinking about making the shift from inbound lead generation to inbound demand generation? And I feel like, we speak about this a lot, don't we? It's kind of the same things keep coming back around. And really the answer is, why people are making or thinking about making the shift from inbound lead gen to inbound demand gen is that buyer preferences and buyer behavior has changed. Buyers know the result of lead generation campaigns when they submit that form on that gated ebook or whatever, that they're going to get spammed with email nurturing, emails that they don't really find helpful at that point in time. They're going to get outreach from sales, phone calls, email outreach, LinkedIn DMs, all the stuff that really just bugs them and that they don't really find helpful on their journey to purchase.
Yeah. And, even though many of us know in our hearts and minds that this change is, best for buyers, it takes time. Changing the way marketing is KPI'd, what activities you do, always takes time. There's lots and lots of businesses that have got to make a transition like this. So hence we need to keep talking about it, keep sharing our insights and our experiences. Change is always scary, and for that reason there's often a lot of resistance that's put up, not necessarily justified resistance, but resistance nonetheless. And then I think that marketing is often subject to sometimes subconsciously personal preferences, subjective biases that get in the way of doing things that are buyer-centric. And so it just means that everything takes time for businesses to understand and appreciate that a change is an opportunity, that something else might work better, to test, implement, satisfy themselves, and so on. So there's a long journey for businesses to go on.
Yeah, and I know I kind of said this is a reflection of the change in buyer preference and buyer behavior, but some might say that it's kind of never really changed, and that actually if you look at the data of your lead generation campaign, you'll see just that, really, that it's actually never been effective. And I think more marketers are just coming around to the fact that that's a reality, and they're kind of past the hype of lead generation, gated content, like content syndication, like leads from all of these sources, and really just come into the sad reality that they don't really convert into paying customers.
That's right. Yeah, the data that drove our changes in our approach, go quite far back. You're not wrong, and I think a lot of businesses, would see the same were they to look, if they had the data and the analytics available to them. But it's been going on for some time.
Yeah. All right. So do you want to just talk through like our journey at Blend in terms, I know it was a few years back, but the journey we went on from lead generation, running lots of lead generation to running none.
Yeah, there were a few signals and triggers that sort of combined to push us over the edge, as it were, to say, yeah, this is absolutely the way to go. And I think one of the major ones was actually, before I go into which ones really helped, we were in quite a fortunate position, perhaps even a luxurious one, whereby for ourselves and for a number of our clients at the time, all marketing was inbound marketing, and those businesses and we didn't have, large other go-to-market strategies in play. We didn't have sales teams doing outbound calling. We weren't doing, extensive paid advertising, be it PPC or social. So there were quite a few things that were fixed or excluded from the consideration that we had to make when it came to looking at the performance of our marketing in terms of pipeline. It was all the pipeline was coming from marketing, and all the marketing was inbound marketing. So, unlike businesses today, that may well have multiple go-to-market channels, running in parallel, the need to sort of split those and analyze those separately wasn't quite as high. And it meant that we were able to focus on the buyer behavior up to becoming what we call an MQL, or, a bottom of the funnel high intent lead that converts into an opportunity at a very high rate, and observe what they were doing as they went along the purchase path that they took. And I suppose the fundamental learning or observation was that, while we were going to all this effort to create good content that was used to generate leads, nurturing those leads didn't get people to the goal of that nurturing workflow or strategy, didn't move people along the buying process down the funnel to becoming a customer. And customers and businesses that we talked to shared the same frustration that no matter what they tried, lead nurturing wasn't a reliable way to turn a lead into a customer. And meanwhile, we noticed that for ourselves and for most other customers doing inbound marketing, they were experiencing increases in the number of MQLs or high intent conversions, but the lead nurturing wasn't producing them. So we decided to look at that quite closely, and we started to build reporting around what was going on with buyers up to the point of becoming an MQL. And I'm just going to share one of the reports that we created back then, which was number of visits at the point of becoming an MQL. And what's really interesting is this is an all-time report, but it has not changed significantly, or hardly at all, from before we shifted from lead generation to demand generation to after, which is to say that the vast majority of the high intent, high quality conversions that we were getting on our website were happening on that person's first software tracked visit, meaning pretty conclusively they weren't downloading content, they weren't submitting forms, they weren't receiving lead nurturing emails, but they were raising their hand, expressing interest, and entering the pipeline and going on to close at quite an attractive rate, to boot. But the leads were going nowhere. And so this started to really clarify our thinking about what is the merit behind the lead generation approach and being optimized for that outcome.
Yeah, I suppose it shows that no matter how many, lead nurturing emails were sent and were aimed at driving people back to the website, it didn't fundamentally. Like, people were still just coming to the website for the first time after doing research anonymously where we couldn't detect them, and just submitting an inquiry there and then on the first visit.
And over a 12 or a 24-month period, you could almost say that none of those leads would become customers. Now, there are differences between businesses, and you may see slightly different rates, albeit everything we hear is that they're frustratingly low. We do get the occasional opportunity that has been a lead, but typically they've been a lead for far longer than that period of time and far longer than lead nurturing is supposed to work. So, again, not really something you can build a business on, I don't think. That started to make us think about, well, hold on, we're optimizing everything for lead generation, which results in us paying to store that data to be able to market to it via email, to be able to nurture it. Like, why pay, why optimize to grow a database, if that isn't the thing that produces high quality conversions and high intent, leads? Why not sort of give that content away freely so that anybody can read it? Let them download it if they want to, still have a database, still create a database, but don't maximize its size, by any means necessary, if that's only going to create cost and to some degree greater, data collection risks.
Yeah.
When you can minimize those things and still get more buyers. Add to that, SEO insights, pillar content, long comprehensive content that's interconnected with your blog and your website, ranks better for informational terms that have high volume. Like, all these things started to come together and make it clear to us that putting everything behind a gated lead gen form wasn't a smart move when it came to growing our brand awareness, brand affinity, pipeline, and customer base.
Yeah, and I know you kind of told the actual tactical move behind it before, and fortunately for us, like, it wasn't so hard at that time, was it? Because like, we didn't have a huge sales team, like you mentioned, and really it was kind of down to you and a few others to say, right, we're just going to do it all in one. Like, we're all on the same page. We're going to take all of this gated content and just ungate it right away. HubSpot had published their research on the effectiveness of topic clusters and pillar pages, and that really was just kind of the approach you used, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We there were relatively fewer things to adjust and change in our situation. Some clients, though, did have sales teams, BDRs, AEs operating, and nevertheless we were able to adapt and adjust the inbound marketing they were doing towards demand gen and just provide those teams with a higher volume of quality leads that really, really helped to drive their pipeline. Albeit there were, there was a need to navigate that transition, in terms of that team's activity. But they weren't, it wasn't really disruptive. They were able to carry on doing what they were doing, but still grow pipeline and revenue because they were getting better leads through inbound marketing.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's actually dive into making that change, for other people listening, watching, what that might look like for you. Obviously, like, we at Blend have our own experience with doing this, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of touch on this more broadly, what like a typical kind of move would look like and what you'd need to cover in order to do this effectively. So from a strategic level, when you're looking at, okay, these are the kind of the big ticket things that I need to run through in order to start making, the change from inbound lead gen to inbound demand gen. And one of the first points that I wanted to make, that I don't think has been at least publicly, kind of documented and made before, is actually the importance of rallying your own marketing team together. Like, as a team, as an internal marketing team, whether you're a team of 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, you all have to be on the same page, willing to take this journey together and all kind of educated on the same thing. So it might be that you've just consumed some content and you're enlightened by what the possibility could look like of moving from lead gen to demand gen. You're curious basically at this point on the benefits of making the move, and somebody has educated you on that. Now it's important to make sure that if you're slightly junior in the marketing team, you're communicating what you've just found out and the education you've just had to the entire marketing team. And likewise, if you're at the top of the tree, make sure that the rest of your marketing team is kind of on the same page, willing to make that journey with you, because ultimately, like, you all have to be on the same page and go through that kind of education period together and unlearn some of the things that you're currently doing and learn the right things that you need to be doing.
Yeah, if there's resistance or disbelief within the team, it's going to be significantly harder to sell the concept into and gain the buy-in from the other teams that it affects and from the leadership, stakeholders that need to be on board too. So you're absolutely right. You've got to get everyone that's contributing to marketing to agree and to understand why the change is beneficial, why it's needed, and to get behind it.
Yeah. And, in most cases, that is literally just sending them links to other content that you found useful and educational and insightful on this topic, whether that be a podcast, a blog, like a LinkedIn post, whatever it is. Just distribute that to the team, get their thoughts, kind of share your opinion on it and whether or not you think that could be good for your team.
Yeah.
So in terms of the next thing, so you've got marketing buy-in, you're all on the same page, you're all intrigued by this move and thinking, okay, how would that plan out for us? This move from lead gen to demand gen, could it be something, that we could go on? And I suppose what you want to start doing really is looking at how your current lead generation is performing, because likely you've been educated to kind of see that it might not be the be all and end all, and things are not happening that you think probably were. So yeah, I suppose this part is all about getting your data in order and really digging into the data to understand the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of your lead generation campaigns and sources. And I've spoken about this before. I think it was on episode 3. Basically, the easiest number one effective way to prove if your lead generation is working for you or not is to do a split funnel analysis. And I think quite a few people are aware of this and have spoken about this, but I thought I'd just do a little run through again, just in case there's anybody new and intrigued by what this kind of is and what you should be looking at. So basically, a split funnel analysis looks at all of your lead sources, whether that be marketing or sales, by the way, and looks at the progression from lead throughout all of your kind of life cycle stages, whether that be MQL, opportunity, closed one. You might have other stages in there too, like SQL or custom ones, depending on your business, PQL, whatever it might be. But yeah, this is just really a standard stripped back version to give you an idea of what you should be looking at. So this is what you're kind of likely to see. This is just sample data, but it's actually surprisingly reflective of other kind of analysis that we've seen.
Yeah.
So what you're likely to see is you've got high intent requests here at the top. And this is anybody that's come to your website and submitted a high intent form to basically say, hiya, I am interested in your offering. Can I talk to you? Or like, can I have a demo? Or I suppose a free trial. And then you're going to split out your other lead sources from non-declared intent channels. So gated content, outbound webinars, in-person events, basically where you've captured contact information and called them a lead pretty much. Mm-hmm. And then work your way through to the next stage, which is likely to be MQL. And then have a look at that conversion rate from lead to MQL. So when it comes to high intent conversions, I'm assuming in most cases, you're going to count that as an MQL. We at Blend count any high intent requests as an MQL. That's kind of our definition for it. But these MQLs from like gated content, outbound, webinars, in-person events are likely to be, from lead scoring and stuff like that. So although the conversion to MQL isn't actually too bad at this stage, it doesn't work out that favorably as we move through. So measure the conversion from lead to MQL, and then start having a look at MQL to opportunity. And this is where things kind of get a bit spicy. So still, your high intent requests are converting pretty well into opportunity, as you would expect. These are people that are coming onto your website, basically, asking to talk to you and become a customer potentially. So you'd expect that conversion to be quite high. And, where we've got the other lead sources down here, like gated content, webinars, in-person events and stuff, the conversion is much, much lower, because whilst you can use lead scoring in MQL stage to artificially boost that conversion to basically whatever marketing want, opportunity is the real deal, right? Like, are they entering your pipeline or not? And you can't really fake that. Well, I suppose you could in some cases if you've got lower quality stages at the start, but chances are your pipeline is going to be pretty solid and truly reflect if somebody is an opportunity or not. At least
That's
it
right.
should. So conversion rates, then you can look, it's going to be lower from those low intent lead sources compared to your high intent. And then when we get into closed one, here's where you're really, really likely to see this huge contrast in what's generated from your high intent leads and what's generated from your low intent lead sources down here. So you're likely to see that a very good percentage of your high intent leads convert into customers, where nearly none in some cases of your low intent leads actually go on to convert into paying customers. And like I said, this is sample data, but go away, do this analysis, split funnel analysis, if you are interested in making the switch from lead generation to demand generation. Look at the conversion rate and the progression of your leads from different sources through your entire life cycle progression, and then just look at the outcome. You're very likely to see something like this. And I'd also add that you can really spice up this report and look at it in many, 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 many ways. Like, you can then include stuff like CAC, ARR, budget, return on ad spend, sales cycle length, churn, by like all of these lead sources. And in 100% of cases, the people that come from high intent requests will outperform any other lead source.
Yeah, not just outperform, outperform by such a huge margin that it throws everything else into grave question. What's interesting is that this data, whilst symbolic, and not unrepresentative, is actually pretty generous in terms of the the conversion rate, the cumulative conversion rate from content lead to customer. We see and hear about businesses, some of whom operate on very large lead volumes, dealing with far lower conversion rates from that type of lead. And when you look at the investment in ad spend and sales team time that's going into generating and following up those leads specifically, it's really quite horrifying. It costs a lot less in some respects to generate a high intent lead, and they close at such a better rate. It's phenomenal. And once you look at this data for yourself, you should have a crystal clear picture of why this change is a good one. As I mentioned, we basically did this analysis, although it was less sophisticated at the time, and we were lucky that we only had a few of these line items to consider, because we weren't doing a lot of outbound. We weren't attending conferences and events. So we basically had content leads and high intent leads to analyze, but the split was very similar to this. Everything was extremely in favor of high intent leads when it came to creating opportunities and revenue. And it didn't take much for us to then say, well, we're going to focus all of our energy on the things that create those, and next to none of our energy on the things that create those content leads.
Yeah, and I also want to add, I've been through this process where we have had a lot of lead sources and have had a lot of marketing budget going into, these kind of sources here. And the important thing here is to look at where the budget is being spent. And you're likely to have actually allocated no marketing budget into generating high intent requests. So it's really important to understand where they're coming from, which is when things like self-reported attribution comes in. And it's really interesting when you start getting results like, oh, I heard about you from a colleague, or, referral here, or word of mouth. It's like, wow, so our marketing is having no impact, well, virtually no impact, according to attribution, on actually getting these high intent requests. So we're just burning budget here on low intent lead sources like this to get absolutely no return on it. So how can we then spool up a new kind of engine so marketing has some impact?
Yeah. And I mean, there are ways to use nearly all of those other channels that align to high intent lead generation, to demand generation, but it's a different approach in each case to the one that businesses have been taking.
Yeah, awesome. Just had a quick question from Trevor. I think Trevor's been here before, so welcome back, Trevor. What are your high intent requests at a lower price generation ideas? Phil, do you want to touch on this? Because I think you've got quite a good take on this in terms of working in that particular direction to get the best bang for your buck, right?
Well, I think that it makes little sense to create a lot of demand, to create a lot of traffic to something that can't convert it into a high intent lead. And so it makes sense, if you can, to work backwards along the purchase path, right? And so websites and their role in capturing demand and in turning visitors into high intent leads are where you've usually got the lowest hanging fruit, a big lever that you can pull, that you can align to this type of engagement, this type of conversion quickly and with confidence, because your website's going to be getting a certain amount of traffic already. A certain amount of that traffic is going to be the right type of your ICP effectively. But if your website and its content is optimized for lead generation, you'll be de-optimized for, buyer conversion, as it were. So we start with websites in the majority of cases because we've seen just how much, applying a buyer-centric or even a human-centric approach to the UX and the content and the conversion offers can step change that high-intent lead production from the same budget effectively. Okay, you've got to spend something on your website, but sometimes those can be incremental changes. You don't have to do a wholesale rethink. So optimize your website for capturing high intent leads first, no need to change anything else, and then work backwards up the pipeline, up the funnel, towards creating demand at the top of it, would be the main piece of advice. And we've talked about it on the previous episode. There are lots of, as I say, small things you can do to your website that will nudge it in the right direction. Sometimes a big rethink in terms of structure, content, messaging, the conversion offer, and so on is needed to get the really big results. But that's where you can take everything that you've got already, everything you've built and created thus far, and squeeze more out of it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost a universal place to start. Like, ultimately, when you're generating high intent leads, the best channels and sources for that are going to depend on your individual company and situation. But every buyer is coming to your website. They're all using it. So universally, if you make those, incremental changes or big changes in some cases that Phil said, to actually, tailor your site for high intent lead generation rather than low intent lead generation, optimize that UX for a buyer to take that perfect journey to purchase, then you're going to have the biggest impact there.
It's also perhaps worth saying that, when you think about the broader demand generation play, it's more or less the same content, right? It's the same expertise, opinion, and knowledge that you've been using to produce content up until now, just formatted and distributed differently. Big ad spend isn't a necessity to get started. You only need to really introduce, paid social and relook at your PPC and so on when you want to scale it. But to get it going, you create the same content that you have been creating, probably at relatively modest cost, because, this isn't a huge production. We're doing this live. We're doing it with the kit we have available. and it's going out onto LinkedIn rather than our website. So it's an adaptation of what you're doing already, which doesn't need to increase the cost of it. You can keep that, opportunity for later.
Yeah. Cool. Hopefully that answered your your question, Trevor.
Sorry, Trevor.
Oh dear. Right.
It's hot day.
It's warm. It's warm. I'm baking right now. Right. So where were we? Data. So you've done your split funnel analysis. I imagine, I'd like to think that you've basically seen that all of your low intent lead sources are performing extremely ineffectively at converting people from lead to customer, and your high intent lead source is converting very well from lead to customer. So what do you do with that data? Well, you have to communicate your findings to the powers that be, the stakeholders that are important to get buy-in from in order to make this change. So yeah, I suppose the next step is to collate all of that information into a really insightful deck with a great story to back up the data and get buy-in.
Yeah, agreed. Nothing to add.
Okay, good. So that was a really quick take on that. Obviously, that the communication part there is likely to be quite extensive and back and forth, and a long process probably of gathering all of that data. Going back and forth with stakeholders, and really understanding what's working, what's not, and getting that buy-in. But let's say it was a breeze. You got the buy-in. It's not likely to be that easy, but hopefully you'll have all the data necessary in the story to get that buy-in. So once you have that,
before we move on, Dan.
Yeah, sorry.
There's another question on the subject we're talking about, so let's tackle that.
Go for it. Rob, hey Rob, hope you're well. Do you automate the split funnel analysis through HubSpot, or would you update the spreadsheet manually? I.e., does the spreadsheet automatically update when new leads come through? I mean, I'll say this to start with. Basically, I think this kind of depends on the level of technology available to you. Like, if you don't have HubSpot or another marketing automation system, you're going to have to hit that spreadsheet up and keep it up to date. Fortunately, for us and customers that we work with, we have the luxury of HubSpot, and we can automate basically any submission that comes. I'm talking about self-reported attribution here, but actually this goes through the same thing. Split funnel analysis, we actually do use HubSpot for. HubSpot has funnel progression reports where you pull in your life cycle stages, and then you can split those out. Like, you can create lists based on lead sources, and then we just put those side by side basically. But to be fair, a spreadsheet is usually quite a good way to actually collate all of that other information that you're likely to struggle to put into a funnel progression report in HubSpot, because HubSpot reporting is, extremely powerful. But when you're actually looking at the funnel one, I think you can only include lifecycle stages in there. And although you can customize those, it's not.
You can build funnel reports separately on lifecycle stages and on deal stages in HubSpot.
Yeah.
And you can report on all of these, conversion rates and stages in HubSpot, but it won't look exactly like that, and it might be in multiple reports. So it doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes. I don't think marketers are ever going to fully get away from spreadsheets, and composing something like this, can be useful. Now, it's probably, we haven't done it, but it's probably entirely possible to automate that feed of data from HubSpot to a spreadsheet. But again, this is usually necessary to create that initial, buy-in that we're going to shift from, converting people into leads and scoring them to make them MQLs to only calling them an MQL when they are expressing their interest in purchasing. And that drives a whole new set of reports in HubSpot that you refer to daily. And you can choose whether you maintain the split funnel analysis going forward, or on what cadence you maintain it, by extracting the data that you have in HubSpot and updating it monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever you need for your stakeholder committee. But you can track it all in HubSpot. with the exception, I would say, of the cost of marketing, that does tend to have to live outside. Haven't found any neat ways to put that into HubSpot alongside lead volume, conversion rate, opportunity, numbers, and so on.
Yeah, I think it would seem excessive to update it as a new lead comes through, or like on a daily basis. So like before, when I was part of making this shift, like a big part of the education and communication of this was part of the monthly kind of commercial meetings where data and stuff was presented. So in that case, it would just be updated on a monthly basis to use for that reporting in that meeting to kind of gradually make that case, for making this shift. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that makes sense and answers your question. Don't think there's anything else to add.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Cool. Right. So now going back to my point. So yeah, you've got buy-in. It's time to make the plan basically from lead generation to demand generation. What's it going to look like? What do you start with? What do you do? Basically, what stages do you need to go on in order to make this shift successfully? So Phil, do you want to take that?
Well, we touched on it a moment ago, but I think this will differ business to business depending on what you think is most broken versus least broken. But in an ideal world, or in most cases, it makes sense to work from the pipeline backwards. If you can't capture demand, there's no point creating demand, right? If you can't convert an interested buyer who's intending to purchase something in your category and is visiting your website into an opportunity, then there's little point doing anything else. So we advocate for a critical path that starts at the pipeline and works back up the buyer journey, the funnel, as it were. So we tend to look at website UX and conversion rate first, because that's where lots of businesses have a big opportunity to improve messaging, improve their conversion offer, improve their user experience, and turn more of their existing traffic and visitors into pipeline, which of course is the goal. So that's usually the first thing to fix. The next thing, which is sort of overlapping, but you can treat it separately, and it might be the first thing for some businesses to do, is revamp their content strategy, as in ungate resources that they've got created already, review internal linking to make sure that they're all powering the website and those pillar pages, those now ungated resources, up search engine rankings. Revisit the content strategy and the plan to create content that's aligned to this new set of goals and objectives.
Yeah.
Now, people listening, watching, maybe thinking, but search is no longer where buyers are consuming content. And to a degree, they're right, but it is still a critical part of the purchase process in most cases.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to optimize your website for buyers who are searching for a purchase so that they find you, and then move on to optimizing, how you develop affinity and awareness and trust and preference for you before the purchase process starts, which is when you look at what content do we need to distribute on social platforms, which groups and forums and communities do we need to be part of, what events do we want to speak at, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and then it goes into, as part of that plan, what are we going to stop? What are we going to do instead? What is, I suppose, predicting that impact of these certain things, and kind of, hypothesizing around what are these things likely to do for us? How long is it really going to take to start seeing results? What are we going to kind of measure indicatively before we start seeing real impact to kind of gauge what's working? And then I suppose actually coming up with those big metrics. What are we going to measure going forward? And one important thing that might be missed out and needs to be considered is actually what skills and resources do you need to deploy in the right areas in order to execute this new way of marketing? Going about inbound lead generation is different to going about inbound demand generation. The from a tactical level, what you need kind of on a day-to-day basis in order to produce the right things is different. So yeah, it's kind of looking at what's available to you right now in terms of that might be people, agency, just skills, I suppose, and how you're going to refine that in order to suit this new plan and strategy.
Yeah.
And then obviously communicate again. It's one that's going to come up over and over again in this journey, like the communication between marketing and stakeholders to get buy-in from this. It's just a constant through the entire process that you just have to get used to and embrace and really approach with consideration. Cool. And then once you've done the plan, let's say you've got buy-in from the plan, so you can now start doing the right things and start executing on that plan. I suppose, Phil, this goes back to your point, kind of, doesn't it, in what order to start doing these things.
Yeah, fix the website, make either incremental or big changes to its pipeline production capability in most cases. Then optimize your lead generation content for demand generation, which is, to a large extent, ungate it, optimize it for SEO. Obviously review the format, the content, and a few other things to do with it, but crucially make it visible to buyers without them having to convert and divulge their contact details, which they won't do. And then continue to create content, because you always want to be growing your footprint in that sense, and trying to improve and maintain rankings for keywords that get buyers to your door. But then that's the time to start thinking about how do you go further and start to create demand amongst buyers who aren't actively purchasing, because of course it's a well-known stat that only a minority of your total addressable market are in a purchase cycle at any particular time. Sometimes it's 5%, or sometimes it's quoted as 5%, sometimes it's 3%. It's always a small percentage. It's still the most attractive percentage to attract to your site and convert, which is why we say go after it first. But the 97%, if you can build a relationship between your brand and them before they start the purchase process, you're able to drive up those high intent leads that do find you via search, visit your content and website, express their interest and convert, make a high intent conversion. That's the way to drive up those numbers over time.
Yeah. Cool. So hopefully that kind of sums things up from a strategic level in terms of these are the parts that you need to go through. And I suppose just to quickly recap on that, because I feel like we did dive around quite a bit. So first thing is to kind of rally everything together, your marketing team, data, get all your data in order, communicate your findings to key stakeholders, plan. So plan your critical path to revenue, start with your website, move on to those demand capture channels. What can you do there to capture more buyers that are ready to buy? Move on to how you're distributing content. Look at what you're going to stop, what you're going to do instead, what the impact is likely to be, what you're going to measure going forwards, the skills that you have right now, the skills that you're going to need to execute this new plan and new strategy, and then communicate that, and then go into the actual doing of it, fixing the website, optimizing the content, creating demand, measuring that. So I thought it'd be useful to actually go into some of the tactics around this, because whilst it's covered kind of broadly in some cases from a strategic level, these are the steps that you need to take in order to pivot from lead gen to demand gen. What does it actually look like from a tactical level? So as we kind of mentioned, start with your website. It's closest to revenue. So Phil, what do some of those tactical changes on your website look like when you're pivoting from lead gen to demand gen?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, architect it with SEO in mind, pages that are optimized for the keywords that your buyers use to describe your solution, are the easiest to rank for those terms and therefore to be found by buyers in search. Review navigation and the customer journey. So, adopt or implement a device appropriate, intuitive navigation, i.e. horizontal navigation, please, on desktop, not burger navigation. More and more businesses feel they need a mega menu in order to present all of their content, and that's fine, but constrain it, make choices on behalf of visitors. Choice paralysis that gets induced when big mega menus open and it's just dozens of options that look identical is not good for the user experience, and anything that's not good for the user experience is not good for your ultimate conversion rate into high intent leads. I think review the conversion offer, the commercial conversion offer that you use to get people to MQL stage or into the pipeline needs to be reviewed, because there's quite a common pitfall or trap that people fall into, which is, they know they've got one thing available. Let's say it's a demo, and that's relatively attractive to buyers. But we know in our minds that a trial with no human interaction and no human contact is even more attractive. So we might be tempted to call it a trial. But then when someone clicks through on that, the form and landing page they see is actually, book a call with our experts or something. It's something less attractive. So, but you'll always get the best results in terms of follow through conversion if you call it what it is and you're honest and upfront about the fact that a trial is a trial or a demo is a demo. Although worth mentioning that I think it's important to look at the close rate from each of those when you decide which one to go with and which one to push, because of course different businesses will have different success rates at turning people who request a demo and people who request a trial into a successful customer. Someone who benefits from the purchase and therefore becomes loyal and has good lifetime value. And then obviously design, content, messaging, all needs to be on point to quickly and concisely convey your unique value proposition, what you do, who you do it for, what problem you solve, why they should choose you, why they should trust you. All these things that are spoken about quite a lot now, online, need to be built into each page's content and each page's design, ultimately to create the best place for a buyer to make a self-directed, self-researched, informed decision to purchase.
Yeah, sorry, I had to mute my mic then because the ice cream van was going past, and whilst I am tempted, I didn't want to, make anybody else hungry. So if my camera goes off in a sec, you know where I am. From a website point of view as well, I think one of the main ones is changing any offer really you have to make sure all roads point to that high intent conversion. Like, that's the main goal of your website. And when it comes to a CTA, things should reflect that too.
Yeah.
So from a content point of view, chances are in a lead generation strategy, you're going to have a lot of gated content that you need to ungate. So from a tactical point of view, how do you go about ungating that? I suppose the first thing to do is organize it into those content clusters for SEO, because the easiest way to get started is just to take that ebook, take that guide, adapt it into a pillar page that can then be found by lots of people rather than just a few people filling out your form. So organize it into clusters that work together, whether that's a pillar page with a few supporting blogs, basically on the same topics that are going to work together.
Yeah, hopefully if businesses have been applying the hub and spoke model to their content as it was, then there's an existing relationship between articles and the landing pages that they were trying to drive visitors to. So hopefully not a huge change to ungate those pieces of content within those clusters, but you might need to update and refresh that approach given the keywords that you will now be aiming those pillar pieces at ranking for.
Yeah. And one thing that you could do, so in our case, we actually, on our pillar pages, if you find them, you should find them actually. I shouldn't say if. They're highly optimized pieces of content that are very easy to find. Basically, we implement optional downloads on our pillar pages because we still see importance of building an email list, I suppose, as a distribution channel. We don't abuse that list in any way, shape, or form, and are highly cautious with what we do with it. But it is a way if you really do want to, keep building that contact database for yourselves, then try implementing optional downloads, which basically you're serving the entire content up front in the pillar page, just with that optional takeaway if somebody, for whatever reason, does want a PDF version of it.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be either or. You can have both as long as it's, you give the freedom of choice to the visitor. You can still generate leads. And actually, we didn't see a massive, drop off of leads generated, funnily enough, from our ungating process. We saw an improvement in MQLs being generated, and that's continued. But we kept getting leads. We kept getting email addresses, which we now, use with care, like you say, rather than expecting them to, receive 3 emails in the sequence and buy something.
Yeah, like just to clarify, we do not send anybody lead nurturing emails after they download a piece of content.
Totally, exactly.
It's just there as an option to help the buyer. Like if they want to do it, they can do it. Cool, there you go.
Yeah.
And then, from an ungated content point of view, once you have all of that gated content ungated and you're starting to build out new content, I suppose start producing your new content from an ungated first mindset. You're not thinking about how many people can I manipulate into, submitting this form. You're really thinking from a buyer first mindset in terms of how can I, best help my buyer with this content? What formats do they like to consume it in? Which channels do they use to consume it in? And what messages really resonate with them and connect with them and will help them?
Yeah, if you're producing a piece of content, with the knowledge that it's going to go into a PDF, while that can work as a very effective piece of ungated content once you do, you're still going to approach things slightly different when you know that you're producing a web page that's comprehensive and you can use more media formats. You can link to a wider variety of things. So there will be, perhaps subtle, perhaps more drastic differences between the two, but those PDF pieces that you've got are a good way to start.
Yeah. And then when it comes into the rest of your channels, I suppose, would you say like content distribution channels almost? Then it's all about kind of taking that channel and realigning it with a new goal. So like email, for example, the goal of email is no longer going to be to try and nurture somebody through from a lead to MQL or lead to opportunity customer, whatever it might be. It's also not going to be the goal of, distributing more gated content through email to get more downloads. If you still want to use email as a channel in inbound demand generation, just use it as a way to distribute content if that's what your buyers want. Like if they want to consume content through email, do that, but don't make it hard for them. Like just serve it up front in the email.
Yeah, absolutely. Use it to deepen the relationship and the affinity, the impact of which can be, a long time from now. It can be in a completely different business. It can be word of mouth, but you can treat those email addresses with respect and increase the likelihood that it's a positive thing without trying to get them to convert again and again, or push them through the funnel.
Yeah. And then when it comes to social, likely in a lead generation approach, you're going to be using social as a way to do a few things. Distribute like product, solution, offer-based messaging. Probably distribute some gated content too. Like you're posting out posts basically say, we have a new guide here. Click this link to download it. Probably links to blogs and links to solutions pages, stuff like that. Basically, scrap all of that. When it comes to inbound demand inbound demand generation for social media, you need to be focusing on in-feed consumption. It's how people using social media want to consume on the platform. It's how the platforms themselves want people to consume content. They don't want people to be darting around all over the place off of their platform to consume this, because they want to keep people on there to serve them ads, basically. So yeah, use social as a way to distribute in-feed consumption that is optimized for consumption right there in the feed. Nobody has to click away. They just get value served straight to their eyeballs and ears.
Yeah.
PPC. So when it comes to Google PPC, I mean, it varies, I suppose, depending on how people use this for lead generation. But I've seen it before, like people are using Google PPC in order to send people to like gated downloads, which is just an absolutely awful use of PPC when it comes to it in a inbound demand generation motion. Focus on those high intent queries, people that are kind of ready to buy, and that you can point to your solutions pages in those cases. Like really using gated content through Google Ads is such a poor use of budget, because chances are, in those high intent situations, those people are ready to buy. They want to look at your solutions right now, and you need to give them an easy path to do that. And hiding it behind a form, it's just a really poor use of that ad spend.
Yeah. I think it's important to keep a close eye on, the net effect of PPC spend, in terms of close rate, and the success that you have with leads that are with even high intent leads that are captured that way. But PPC is part of search, and search is a demand capture channel now, so that should guide your use of PPC as a channel. It's not about creating demand in the first place, and it's not about capturing leads at the top of the funnel. It's really about targeting those high intent in market buyers, and appearing higher than you would organically, or competing more effectively for that share of that screen. But it doesn't always necessarily produce stellar, phenomenal results down at the pipeline. So keep an eye on that aspect of things as well.
Yeah, good shout. PR. Just thinking of
Don't have a
channels.
lot of no.
Okay, let's not mention PR.
No.
Let's get straight past that. Cool. Whilst we've literally got a few minutes left, once you've gone past that tactical level, that's just a few examples of changes you're probably going to need to make, and hopefully some insight into that. I thought it was also useful, and we kind of wanted to touch on why marketers are failing to make this shift. Like, what are some of the common stumbling blocks that we see and we've come across that really just stops marketers from making this pivot?
I think you'll have seen some different reasons to me here, so I've probably got a few different points to make.
Yeah, do you want to kick things off?
Well, I mean, I think for me, the first one on our list I'm going to leave for you, because I think it's a really critical, important one. But sort of the next one, I think, is sometimes it's just lack of alignment. Like, this change requires multiple moving parts to be lifted and shifted and adapted in concert, right, in coordinated fashion. And if you can't get everybody on the same page, on the same calls, working to the same objective, if you're not aligned to it, it can be really hard to see it through. Even though you all know it's a good thing and you want to do it, it can still evade people. So it takes effort, it takes coordination, and it takes perseverance. And a lot of agencies will know that them and their customers often know exactly what they want to do and what the right things to do, and yet still it can take far longer than we would have expected in some situations to get it all done, because other priorities come in and disrupt the planned work, and events crop up that take all the attention away, and so on and so forth. So it's a team effort, and it takes coordination and perseverance to pull it off.
Yeah, and within that team, like, there's no better teammate for you to get aligned with than sales. Like, this has to be an absolutely fluid journey for both teams in complete harmony making, this change together. Like, chances are you've probably got a decent sized sales team that are probably picking up some of the leads that you're currently throwing over to them. You have to work with sales, probably sales leaders, on what this is going to look like going forward. How do they then redistribute their time? Like, instead of, picking up the phone, phoning these gated leads, gated content leads that you're sending them, these webinar leads, probably they're doing some outbound cold calling and stuff like that, to low intent people. Yeah, it's really, really just so important to have alignment with sales and how you make this transition together. If you're going at it alone from a marketing team, like, you're just not going to get buy-in. As simple as that. So yeah, that's one of the key stumbling blocks, not having that alignment with sales.
I have some good news for people, which is that if you take a continuous but phased approach to shifting your content model to demand generation, updating your website, ungating your content, creating content natively for social. If you do that, if you don't go big bang with that, but you do it piece by piece, which most people will have to, limited resources, limited time, and if you continue to make download an optional thing, then you can actually, I know, offset the drop in lead volume that you're going to ultimately see, or how you go after those leads, with the increase in high intent leads at the bottom of the funnel anyway. The big concern is that the leads are going to drop off a cliff, and the high intent leads are not going to pick up to the level that they were or that they need to be to offset that change, and crucially to utilize and help a sales team hit target, right? We need to do some analysis on this, but truth be told, we didn't see a drop in lead generation when we continue to allow optional download, so you could still have those leads for sales for a time. And MQL generation picks up really quickly in a lot of cases, especially when you work from the pipeline backwards. It isn't years to see the shifts that give everybody the confidence to continue and persevere. Often it's only months, so it's not all doom and gloom. When you do set out on this journey, you could be in a very different position quite quickly.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other points is actual lack of knowledge on the subject. So when it comes to marketing for demand generation, marketing to generate high intent leads rather than trying to generate any old lead that you can, any old contact, it requires a new way of thinking. Like, you have to go through an education phase in order to, like I said, unlearn some things that you're currently doing and relearn new things that are aligned to, the end goal of inbound demand generation, which is high intent leads, opportunities, revenue, and stop doing things that are aligned to generating leads. So actually, one of the pitfalls is you've tried to make this change, but you kind of don't know what to do in order to ramp up this new stage, this new strategy. So yeah, that's a pitfall too. So yeah, I mean, in that case, educate yourself using content like this, hopefully, like other things, and get help when you can from like consultants, agencies, ask communities like Exit 5, Demand from Metadata, and yeah, just get help.
Yeah, and refer to, amongst other things, the inbound demand generation methodology that we've published, because we want to help businesses shift the investment they've already made in inbound marketing that's optimized for lead generation, naturally to a demand generation strategy. So we've put all of that knowledge out there as well. It's not the only way to go about it, but it's a good way for people that have got ebooks and landing pages and nurturing workflows and marketing automation software. It's a really good guide to help you adapt the things that you've created and the things that you've invested in to this new outcome.
Yeah. And I think that was the perfect point to end on, actually.
Good point. Yeah.
Cool. Right. So let's wrap things up there. And hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. I know I did. I think that's probably one of my favorites so far. That was really, really good. So yeah, be sure to follow our LinkedIn page if you want to join any of these live in the future. And of course, you can watch all the previous episodes on Blend's YouTube channel or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or basically anywhere if you just search for Demand Decoded. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Cheerio.
Thanks, everyone.